Good morning. I am making this video to help because I'm seeing a lot of people that are struggling with the assembly tutorials that we started last week. So if you'd like to follow along with this video, you can find the assignment that I'm working through in Module 19 in the Wednesday folder. This assignment is called Day 2 Assignment, Assembly Tutorial Part 1. So in the instructions for this, it says that you need to complete 3 parts of the tutorial that is titled Assembly Tutorial in the Onshape Learning Center. You need to complete the assembly interface, the mating parts, and the working with assemblies. I will go through all 3 of these in this video. The only one that you need to submit for credit is Part 3, but I would strongly encourage you to complete all 3 parts so that you are more familiar with how to use the tools in Onshape. So I am opening the link right now to the tutorial, and it takes you to the first part of the assignment, and there are some videos for you to watch with some self-checks and some tutorial information that I would strongly encourage you to use as you are working through this practice. I'm going to skip to the exercises because those are what I will be showing in this video. So the first exercise is called Insert a Part. Well, we will be using this piece of an assembly called the universal joint, and we will be working with that to understand some basic functions in Onshape. So I'm going to sign into my Onshape account. Now notice that it's taking us to cad.onshape here and not myips.onshape. So just bear in mind that you won't be able to see all of your files in this version of Onshape. The first thing that we need to do is we need to make a copy of this file. For this tutorial, it has this text right here, but on some of the future ones, it will not have this text. So if you ever need to make a copy of a universal file like this, you can just click on these 3 bars for the document menu and click on Copy Workspace. I'm going to call this 1A Adams Isaac Universal Joint. And that's going to open my own version of the file. And you'll notice that we've got all of the different Part Studio features here that are listed. If we go back to the tutorial, we can go to the next step and it'll show us what to do next, which is to create an assembly. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to click on the plus sign, and I'm going to select on Create Assembly. And that's going to give us the environment that we need to produce this assembly. The next step is to insert our model, which if you follow the instructions on here, it will show you exactly how to do that. We're going to click on Insert. We're going to click on our part, and we're going to place it in our document. I'm going to place it a little bit to the right of the origin because we will be putting it on the origin in just a minute. The next step is to press the green checkbox in the Insert menu. So now our part is located in the assembly environment, and if we click and drag it, we can move it freely. There's nothing constraining the model here. The next thing it wants us to do is to use the part manipulator, or they call it the triad manipulator, which is a set of arrows and circles that allow us to move the part piece by piece. So I'm going to click on my model, and you can see that when I do that, I get the part manipulator here. However, I want to pick on this very specific part of the model, which is this little rectangular face in between these 2 upward flange parts. So I'm going to use my view cube here to change my angle so that I can get to the side with that piece. You can also use an external mouse to click drag if you have a mouse. And then we're going to click on that face so that we can get the part manipulator. As you can see there, that's what these 3 arrows with the squares, that's called the triad manipulator. I'm just going to call them the angle things. Okay, so that's the wrong one. So now that we've got that, the next thing is to make sure that we place this on the origin. So to do that, once we've got our piece selected with the triad manipulator, we're going to hover over the center circle here and then Alt-click to bring up this menu. and we're going to select Move to Origin. Now you can see that my part has moved, and I can still move it. So make sure that it is at the origin. If you move it on accident, you can always click that piece again and move it back. The next step is to align it with the Z-axis. So what that means is that we need to click on this face. We're going to Alt-click on this downwards facing arrow here. This is our Z arrow. And we're going to click on Align with Z. That makes sure that our part is straight up. So right now it is not aligned with Z, but it should be. There we go. If it's not working for you, you can also click on Anti-Align with Z, but we want to make sure that that arrow is faced straight up. So if it's not working for you, make sure that your shape is pointed upwards in the top direction. You may need to click on different arrows until you get it aligned correctly. So right here you can see this is our front face. So now this is upside down. So I'm going to click on Anti-Align with Z to flip it the correct direction. Alright. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fix it in place. To do that, we are going to Alt-click on that face again, and we're going to select Fix. So now, if I try to click-drag this model, nothing happens. And that is the last step in this tutorial part. The next exercise is called Mating Parts, and this one is a little bit more advanced. We're going to create this C-clamp here. So we're going to open the exercise file. I'm going to go ahead and close the universal joint. And again, you can see that it opens a view-only document, so we're going to click on Make a Copy. And I'm going to call this 1A, Adams Isaac, clamp. So that brings up this, which is part of the clamp, and you can see that if I click on this, I'm actually in Part Studio, and what we want to be in is Assembly. So make sure that you switch over to the Assembly tab. Then we're going to insert our parts. We have two main parts or sub-assemblies to add here, which is the clamp parts and the handle parts. Don't forget to click the green checks on the insert box once you've done that, because you can't really modify anything in this until you have closed out the insert window. Now I like to move these parts just a little bit away from each other just so that I can see all the parts that I'm dealing with here. So you can see we've got 6 parts that we need to put together. So I'm going to go back to the tutorial instructions, which I accidentally closed. And we are in the mating parts. So I'm going to click through here. We've already inserted these. Now it does want us to move the center channel of this clamp to the origin and fix it into place. It's always best practice to center your main part and lock it into place, so that way you can base everything else's location on one centered part. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put the sides of these clamps onto the rod. So I'm going to do this left clamp first. And for this connection, we are going to use the fastened mate. That means that this part will be permanently connected to this face, and there will be no motion allowed between the two parts. Now, when you are selecting the face for this mate, you need to be really careful about where you click. As you can see, when I move my mouse around here, I've got a lot of different options. The first one is actually wrong. This is not the correct location for the mate. We want this rod to be on the inside of this face. So as you can see, when I hover now, that's the proper face. So make sure that you pick the right one. And if you're having trouble getting it to select the right one of the tricks that you can do is you can hold down the Shift key once you've got the right face, and then you can move your mouse around to make sure that you put it in the proper spot. Again, so right now, if I tried to click, I might accidentally put it on the wrong spot. For instance, this corner of the wrong face, because it looked like it was on the center of that inside face, but that's not the right one. So what I do is I choose the right face, I hold down Shift, and then I turn my view just a little bit to make sure that I've got the right one, and then click to place it. Now we're going to turn our view a little bit, and we're going to select this left face of our rod. And as you can see, that fasten is correct. If it's on backwards, such as this, you can use these two options to change the mate to make sure that you have the right direction. And that is what it's supposed to look like. So these two parts are now fused together, and you can see if I try to drag this clamp side over here, nothing happens. If I try to click the rod, nothing happens. That's what it's supposed to look like. Okay, now if we try to add this next one, we're going to use a slider mate to connect it, and you can see that we're using limits according to this tutorial. So I'm going to select the faces just like we did before. We're going to use a slider mate this time, which you can see up here in the menu. I'm going to click the middle of this rod's face, and then I'm going to turn my camera and make sure that I select the inside of this face right here. And that is what that's supposed to look like. But there's some limits that we're supposed to put in. So the limits are supposed to be 0. Oh, I actually selected the wrong face. As you can see here, in the instructions, they actually select the outside face of the clamp. No big deal, that's easy to fix. We're going to just deselect. Actually, I'll just cancel the mate and start that over. So slider mate, select this middle, and then this time we're actually going to select the center of this face, and I'm holding Shift here to make sure that I select the inside of that face instead of somewhere in the middle there. And that looks good. So now I'm going to put in the limits, which the limits for this are 0 and 7.5. So I'm going to check this box and put in 0 as the minimum and 7.5 inches as the maximum. And we can always use this play button right here to test the motion to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. And that looks good. If you are working on it and it doesn't look right, so for instance, let me type in 10 here. You can see that it does the exact same thing that it just did. And that's because when I pressed play, it hadn't updated this value in the simulation. So if you ever change it, click out of the box before you press play to make sure that it has the correct values. So that mate is good. Now I'm going to go to the next step, which is to put together the handle on here. So we're going to use fastened mates to put the handle and the threaded shaft together. So let me move up here. These two parts are what we're dealing with. So we want this inside face to be connected to this top cylinder on the threaded shaft. So I'm going to click on fastened. I'm going to click on this face here. That one's easy. And then I'm going to turn my view to make sure that I get the right face. Make sure that you don't pick that outer one. We want that inside face. And again, if it does this sucker like that, all you need to do is just make sure that you press this flip primary axis to make sure that it's going the right direction. Alright, so I'm going to finish that fasten. Those two parts are now stuck together. Here comes the tricky part. Alright, so on the end of this clamp piece here, there is a ball clamp. Now, if you are looking very carefully here, they give us a zoom in on what this is supposed to look like. Notice that the blue axis on this fasten is pointed up. That's the z-axis, and it's pointed up on this other face as well. So we are going to do a ball mate. And I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to click on this guy. See how the z-axis is oriented up. And then I'm going to select this guy, and that should work. Now notice when I did that the z-axis is still pointed up on both parts, but that it pulled the handle out here. When I finish this fasten here, that will be fixed. So if you're worried about that, don't worry about it, because when I click check, you can see that it moves the other part together. And now, when I click drag this guy, everything is all stuck together. If I try to rotate this shaft, it should rotate. Why is it not rotating? There we go. It's rotating now. That's what it's supposed to do. All right. That brings us to the next step. If I'm going too fast, remember that you can always pause this video and step back a couple of seconds to double check that you didn't miss something. All right, the last step on this model is to add a cylindrical mate, which allows for this to rotate with the threads on the screw on this part of the rod, as well as on this part right here. So we're going to use cylindrical, and we're going to be connecting this front face of this cylinder to the other side of this shaft. So let me turn my view here. We are using a cylindrical mate. I'm selecting this outside face on this clamp piece, and then I'm selecting the edge face of that cylinder. And that is what it should look like. Notice that it didn't move the other two parts. It will update that in a moment. So that looks good, but now we need to add the limits, which are -3 and 0 from the tutorial. So check the limit box, and we are going to add make sure that you don't change these angled Z limits, we just want these top two. So we're going to set these to -3 and 0. And I'm going to click out here to make sure that that number is proper, and then I'm going to press play to make sure that that looks okay. And that doesn't look right, but let me go ahead and place this and see if it works the way that it's supposed to. So I can click on this and press play. It still doesn't look right. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to do it one more time. So I'm going to add them in the opposite order this time and see if that solves the problem. So this time I'm going to select this face first, and then I'll select this face second. Let's try that. That looks better. Now I need to add those limits again, which were -3 and 0. Oops, -3, 0. So now if I press play, we get the correct motion, which is that this screw is now rotating on the inside of this clamp. So now I should be able to animate this. I should now be able to move this back and forth, and it does what it's supposed to do. And that is the end of this tutorial, which means that we will now move into the last one, which is a little bit tricky. So this is called the Universal Joint Assembly. I'm going to open this guy. And notice here that we're going to click Make a Copy again. I'm going to call this 1A. My name is Isaac. I'm going to call this part 3 so that I don't confuse it with the first one. Alright, so now I'm going to follow the steps we're going to create an assembly tab. Click the plus sign. And it wants us to name that assembly tab Universal Joint Assembly. All right. So the next step is to insert our parts, which for this we are going to insert the universal joint flange, which is this guy right here. All right, and then we're going to fix that guy in place. And then we're going to insert the universal joint components. So I'll go ahead and fix him. So this is now fixed in place. By the way, can't unsee that smiley face. There's two eyes and there's the smile. Anyway, we're going to click these guys in. Put that right there. And then we are going to click the checkbox on our insert and follow the next step, which is to mate the universal joint center block to the flange. And we are going to select the inside face of this square and put it in the middle of this shape here with an offset, or sorry, with a limit of -90 and 90. And notice this is a revolute mate. So we are going to select revolute from the menu here. I'm going to select this middle face right here. And then I'm going to select the middle of this square or cube. And that looks right. Now we need to add our limits, which are -90 and +90. And we can test that rotation. And that looks good. So we'll go to the next step. And the next step is to mate the universal joint axle to the bushing with a fastened mate. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people that are having trouble with this, so make sure that you select the correct faces. On here, it's the face that's next to the holes, and on here it is the face that is next to that that fillet on the middle piece there. So let's go ahead and do that. Close out of my Revolute. I'm just going to pull these guys apart so I can make sure that I select the right face. So I'm going to click on Fastened Mate. I'm going to zoom in here. And we want this face right here. Let's make sure that's right. Yep, so it's where the beginning of that fillet is there. And then I'm going to turn this around and make sure that we select the right part there, which should be that middle surface between the fillets. So right there. And that looks okay. You can see that that just sits flush on the surface there, so that's good. Alright, so then we've accepted the mate. And going to the next step, which is to connect the bushing to the center block. So we're going to select this flat edge on this cylinder here and put it on the surface of that square shape right there. Now I'm going to do something here, which is that I'm going to hide this universal joint, this piece right here, so that I can make sure that I've got the right face. It's a very helpful thing to do sometimes when we've got a lot going on. So as you can see, I just went up here and I just clicked on the eyeball to hide the part. Alright, so we are selecting the edge of this piece right here. So I'm going to select Fastened Mate. And we want this cylinder edge right here, I believe. Let me double check that one more time. Yep. So this edge, and then I'm going to hold Shift and move my mouse here to make sure that I select the middle of this square. Let's see how it does with that. It's thinking about it. I think that's backwards. So let me flip that around. That looks better, so I'll click the checkbox to place that, and let's see if I was wrong. That looks good. Actually, it does not. I think I was right the first time. So I'll just open this fasten back up and flip that around. Nope, that's also wrong. I think I selected the wrong face. So I'm going to delete this fasten, and I'm going to bring this guy back out. And I'm going to try that one more time. Actually, I think I had it right, but I forgot that I had that other piece hidden. So I'll do that one more time just for funsies. So I'm going to select this face and then that face. Flip it the correct direction, place the part, and then I'm going to unhide that universal joint, and that is exactly what it should look like. All right, so that is this assembly up until this point. Now the next step is that we are going to select these two parts in our menu, and we are going to move them to a new sub-assembly. So it's the graphite phosphor bronze bushing and the universal joint axle. So we're going to select these two. I'm going to use Shift-click to select both of them. I'm going to Alt-click on them, and I'm going to click on Move to New Subassembly. And so that opened a new tab called Assembly 1, which we are going to rename. We are going to rename it Universal Joint Axle Subassembly. Universal Joint Axle Subassembly. All right. And so then we are going to use the triad manipulator, which is the little line things, and we are going to move it to the origin and anti-align it to the z-axis. So we're selecting the bottom of that wheel face here. We're going to move that to the origin, and we are going to anti-align that downwards facing arrow to the Z. I'm actually going to select the upwards one and align it with the Z, because mine was opposite of what they had in theirs. So now you can see that it's facing up. Actually, I think it might need to be facing down. So I will anti-align that with Z, like that. All right. So now we are going to fix it into place, just like we've done before. So now that part is where it needs to be. And then we're going to go back to the subassembly, and we're going to use the replicate feature to add that subassembly a few times, 3 times to be specific, on these 3 faces. And what that will do is it'll allow us to do the same thing with less effort. So the replicate button is in our menu up here. It should be. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing. Make sure that you are in the assembly and not the part studio. I'll just move that over there. So the replicate function is this guy right here. Looks like a Lego piece. And we are going to select our instance, which is going to be the subassembly, which you can actually get to over here. You can see that that subassembly has this little square with a square on it. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to change this to match individual faces on this drop-down menu here. Match individual edges, sorry. And then we are going to select the edges that we're going to match, which are going to be the ones that have these holes. So I'm going to select these edges of the holes here. And that's what we want. Click the check. Rotate that to make sure it still works. Looks okay. Next step is to add another universal joint flange. So I'm just going to go to Insert, and I'm going to drop this guy in here. Click the checkbox. And then we are going to use a revolute to add this piece. So it says mate the second instance of the joint flange to the center block, centering it so that it can revolute and rotate. And we are going to use the explicit mate connectors that are already established in each part, which is what this middle joint is right here, in case you wondered what that was. So we are going to use the revolute mate. I'm going to click on this guy, click on this guy. And as you can see there, it's plopped itself right into place. None of my parts are clipping with each other. We do need to add our limits, which are -90 and 90. And we can test those to make sure that it rotates the way it's supposed to. Looks good to me. So now you can see that when I move my part here, when I rotate it this way, looks good. But I can also rotate it the other direction. So I can test both my revolutes, which is what allows it to rotate that way. I'll just reset these here. So you can see that I can tilt this guy this way as well as this way. So that is that tutorial. And then the last thing that I'm going to go through today is the other tutorial, which is in the Day 3 assignment. So I'm going to go back to Module 19 in the Thursday folder. And I'm going to go through how to do this last tutorial, which is the mating assembly components. It's in a different tutorial file. It is this first one called Basic Assembly. So I'm going to open this document and make a copy of it. So I'll make a copy, and I'm going to call this 1A, Adams Isaac Basic Assembly. And now I've got all my parts here. In my part studio, but now I need to make an assembly. So I'm going to press the plus, create an assembly, and now we can follow the steps here. It says that we're going to call the assembly tab hydraulic clamp assembly. So I'll just alt click and rename that hydraulic clamp assembly. Next step is to insert my parts. We are going to insert the hydraulic components from the Part Studio. So by selecting this, it allows me to drop all the parts in all at once, but notice they're not connected to each other. So we need to add all of our mates to these. So I just separated them there so that way we can see all the individual pieces, and I'm going to click the checkbox. So we're going to fix the cylinder, which is this guy right here. I'm going to move the bottom face to the origin. Oh, I clicked the wrong thing there. So I'm going to click on the bottom face here, and I'm going to move that to the origin. And then I'm going to alt-click again to fix it. So now our part starts, our assembly, starts at the origin, and that part is right where it needs to be. It's fixed. Then we are going to make another O-ring. There's two ways you can do this. You can either copy and paste from the one that's in there. What I also like to do is just go into Insert and just drop another one in from the Insert menu. So now we have two O-rings. That's what this guy's called. A little piece of rubber that kind of protects the equipment and seals it if it's got liquid in it, such as the case with this one. Alright, so now we're going to do a fastened mate to connect the top of the swing arm to the cylinder here. So we are using fastened mate. I'm going to click this guy here, and then I'm going to click on the top of this shape right here. So I'm going to get to the face that I want, press shift, nope, that's not going to work. Just make sure that we select the right one, use shift to make sure that I'm on the right top there. Let's make sure that looks okay. Yep. Alright, next step is to use my O-rings and fasten those guys where they belong on the on this piece right here. So it says mate the O-ring to the cylinder, which is what this guy is right here. So we are going to use fastened mate. I'm going to select the center of this guy, put it on there, that looks good. And then do the same thing down here. Click, and then drop it into this piece. Oh, you can see there that's not quite right, so I'm going to deselect the cylinder, although sometimes it's a little bit hard to see, so I'm going to cancel that, move it out of the way, and try that again. That looks better. Alright, so there's that piece. And then we already did that. So now it wants us to do a section view to make sure that we put this piece at the true bottom of the cylinder. So we can go to the next slide, I believe. Nope. So it says to mate the plunger to the cylinder, select the cylindrical mate. The select mate connectors as at the connection points shown. The mate connector point on the cylinder is on the bottom inside. So we can use a section view to see that if we want to, which we can do over here to do a section view on this part. That way we can select the right face. Now you can see where that is. So we want to do a cylindrical mate. We're going to select this face right there and this face right here. And you can see it's kind of glitching out a little bit when I do that, because remember, it's only going to move the parts that we're attached to. And now I can click out of that, and we should be able to test our motion here. You can see that I have the ability to rotate the cylinder up and down like so. That looks good. Alright, so we're going to go to next, and then we're going to add these limits to our cylindrical that I forgot to do, which is -40 and 0. Notice that we're in millimeters now. We should be able to test this and see if that works. I think I used the fix on the wrong part. So I'm going to unfix this guy, and I'm going to fix the cylinder. And the reason for that is because when we test this, we really want that arm to go up and down and not the main body. So now when we do this, that looks better. So now this guy moves, not the part that goes into the bottle or whatever this is going to connect to. And that's it. That is the end of this assembly, and it is the end of this video. I did not intend for this to be a 40-minute long video, but here it is. I will include links in the description of this video so that you can find the specific parts of the video that you need to work on. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me through Schoology, and I'm more than happy to set up an appointment with you to help if you still need that. Have a good one.